Everyone tweet like your life depends on it.
I am being told that we are live. I'm just going to give one more second of filler just to make sure that everything is going. But hello everybody who is watching, and welcome to the first episode of a new Megaphonic live stream, Take Your Pick. I'm your moderator for this episode, Chris Puma, and let me get this big title card out of the way so that we can all see each other. Hello.
Hi.
Now the format for this show is simple. I have assembled a panel, and I've given these panelists a topic, and they're going to take turns picking an example from that topic, which they get to keep. Nobody else can have it after they've picked it, and they get about 2 minutes to explain why they've picked what they've picked, when they can talk about what's so great about their choice, after which other panelists can chime in if they so choose. And if you're watching this live, you can too. You can just type a comment, and maybe we'll read it out on the show. It'll be exciting. We'll do that for about 3 or 4 rounds. We'll go for about an hour or so, and that'll be fun times. The topic for today, in our first foray, is children's television. Now, Wikipedia defines children's television as, quote, television programs designed for and marketed to kindergartners, preschoolers, and toddlers. And I'm already going to take issue with that. I'm the moderator today. I get to decide what counts as children's television and what doesn't. And I'd say anything geared for kids under, let's say, 13 should count as children's television, not just preschooler stuff. So, that said, let me introduce our panelists in the randomly selected order that they will be picking their picks. First off, we have my co-host in Riffing TV's Adam Clark.
Woo! Hello, I'm the Secret Square.
Then we've got my co-host in Reading, Suzanne Akbari.
Hi, I'm excited about establishing the definitive canon of children's TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Then we will have Adam's co-host in Spooking, Sarah Chamberlain.
Boo, hello, and welcome. It's me.
And then we've got a co-host from another Mo-host, Sean Frost.
Bad shows need love too.
Mm-hmm.
That's very true. And finally, my cohabitant in Living, Michael Collins.
This is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I actually am not quite sure what a television is.
That'll come back to haunt you. And of course, as your moderator, I'm going to be going last. I will let these fine people take all the good picks away from me. So before we begin, I want to throw a shout out to Jason Snell, who I stole this format from. Okay, I asked him permission, so it's cool. But everybody, I suggest that you check out his podcast, The Incomparable, where they have perfected this draft format and that we're about to mangle. Or not. Let's see how it goes. Adam, you get to make the first pick. What are you going to choose?
Absolutely. Well, I've chosen something that I feel reflects the values of parents and the wholesome needs of children, which is why I've chosen the Ren and Stimpy Show. And I think the Ren Stimpy Show is more or less perfect. Essentially, you have 2 characters who you could put in any situation, and it's usually going to be funny. You have the unique combination of a chihuahua that sounds like Peter Lorre and a cat that sounds like Larry Fine from the Three Stooges. And the style of humor is generally a cross between like Jay Ward style sweet silliness of Rocky and Bullwinkle mixed with total nihilism and surrealism, as Ren and Stimpy tend to die in 90% of the episodes. Die horribly, I say. And of course, it trademarked the gross close-up of things in a vivid painting, which is stolen on TV shows even today.
Oh, man. Yeah, the gross close-up is the thing that I took away from that show more than anything. It really made it hard for me to watch it.
Yeah, I could not watch that show. It was like viscerally upsetting to me.
To this day, my dad talks about Ren's toothache like it's Vietnam.
Oh, what's that? Oh, it's just my brain. It's so big. Great choice. Great choice.
My primary memory is a jingle warning me not to pee on electric fences. So.
Same episode.
Don't you whiz on the electric fence.
I love that episode ends with Satan going, "Yeah, you whizzed on the electric fence, didn't you?"
Also, try not to meet the creator of Ren and Stimpy.
No, I did, and it's bad.
Are we allowed to ask if this was anyone else's pick, or shout out if it was
Sure.
ours?
You can shout out if you had that on your list as well.
Was that on your list, Suzanne?
Oh, we have our first sniping. Very good. Very good form.
Right off the bat.
That's
And again,
okay. I feel really good that other people are feeling love for Ren and Stimpy because it is eternal.
Oh yeah, I recommend joining the Ren Stimpy Super Secret Fan Club on Facebook, as Bob Camp, the creative head for the entire show, not the horrible creator, is frequently on there, and he's a super sweet guy.
And if you're watching this live, you can type in a comment if you want to say something about how much you love or hate, I guess, Ren and Stimpy, and we'll try to get it up on there. But do it while people are giving their spiel, because it takes a little time because of lag. That would be great. Oh, we've got a few people watching. Hello, and hope you're enjoying the show. We are going to go on to our second person, which is Suzanne. Suzanne, what's your pick?
I have to pick the iconic or important children's television show, early 1970s, Sesame Street.
Yeah.
Old school. Is it not important? I'm of an age where I was old enough to watch the first episode of Sesame Street. And one of my very first memories of childhood was going to bed in our little apartment in Wayne, New Jersey, not able to close my eyes, so excited, thinking, my God, this is such a great TV show. I'm so excited about this TV show. And much of my childhood was spent watching TV, so Sesame Street was definitely part of it. And in those days, it was still kind of rough around the edges. There was no Muppet Show. There was no Elmo. Kermit was still on Sesame Street as a reporter. There were characters like Roosevelt Franklin. There was Guy Smiley. There were all kinds of rough on the edges kinds of characters. And of course, there were very important relationships like Ernie and Bert, and Big Bird and the Snuffleupagus, and so on. And so, like, for my childhood, that was super important. But the most important part of that show were the little short vignettes, like where you get like numbers 1 to 10. You 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know those. And then like the ball that would roll through all this thing with kind of carnival music, and then at the end it would get ground to dust in this utterly nihilistic kind of moment. Remember that? So those little clips really had a huge impact on me, and so I grew up to work for a while in video editing, and so I think that early exposure to the tightly edited Sesame Street was a big part of that. And then I got to watch it all over again when my children were small. So Sesame Street is truly important.
Yeah,
I'll just leave you with Ernie and Bert.
Well, Suzanne, I'm with you as being old enough to remember a different Sesame Street, because I'm old enough to hate the new voice of Grover.
I am not quite old enough to have seen the original Sesame Street, the first season when it aired, but I grew up in New York, and they have a museum of television and radio, and one of the best things that you could do back in the day before YouTube was go to the museum of television and radio, get one of the selection of old TV shows that they had, and watch it in a little booth with a few friends maybe. And so I have seen the first episode of Sesame Street that way, and it is very strange and different and lovely. It's got a few of the sequences that you might know, like the crayon making, I believe, is in that first episode. And as people may know, the early Oscar is orange, which is a little weird. But yeah, no, it's of course terrific. And obviously, I think it was on my list. I assume it was on everybody's list. Also, I
actually forgot that.
I forgot. I did, because it's so canonical and ubiquitous.
It is, yeah. It's just beyond even thinking about. It's obviously.
And I love Super Grover.
Go ahead. Sorry, Adam.
No, I just said I loved Super Grover, and yet it wasn't on my list.
I drew a picture of Grover and sent it to our local newspaper, which would display children's drawings, and they printed it. So.
I'm sorry, I was picturing you doing that like as an adult.
Sure, yeah.
It was a month ago. Yeah.
One familiar piece of trivia for I think a lot of people may already know this, but that pinball song, the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is sung by the Pointer Sisters, which is an amazing thing that they don't tell you when you're a child, but everybody should be exposed to the Pointer Sisters so young. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Does anybody else remember when the count meant the countess, who counts backwards?
No.
And they had to like figure out how to work together. Is this just something that I made up?
That sounds familiar.
I've never heard of that, and I thought Guy Smiley was a very deep cut. I haven't heard a reference to Guy Smiley in a long time.
Oh, I had a childhood desire to be Guy Smiley when I grew up, which basically is what I'm doing right now.
In a play in high school, I was criticized by some of the other actors for my characterization choices by being told I was playing the character like he was Guy Smiley.
All right. Well, we could probably talk all day about Sesame Street, and maybe we'll do one of these episodes about favorite Sesame Street / Muppet characters or something like that. But I think we should let Sarah tell us what her first choice for children's show is.
All right, I'm going with one that I think might get sniped later, so I'm grabbing it before it does, which is Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yes.
Yep, that was on a lot of lists.
Yeah, it was a Nickelodeon show that ran only 3 seasons, and it's like much more recent than the last 2 picks, so 2005 to 2008-ish. And yeah, this series was like, I actually got into this way later than most people. Like, I kind of avoided it up until after season 2. And then people were just loving it. But I'm so picky about cartoons in my adult age, unsurprisingly. And like, I just find that, like, I didn't understand that a cartoon could be super mature and adult friendly, but also one of the funniest shows in existence. So it's like, I mean, outside of anime, of course, which most anime is aimed at like adult audiences anyways, but the art is breathtaking in this show. Like the fight choreography and like actual choreography is unbelievable. There's so much thought put into every aspect of it. It deals with these super mature themes like totalitarianism and genocide and war, but then like it has super complex villains that are often sympathetic, but you're encouraged to listen to their side of the story and like understand how horrible scenarios can happen by, you know, differing opinions and stuff and like different ways that people are raised. But then there's also an entire episode dedicated to the characters watching a play about themselves where they've been amazingly cast by stereotypical versions of their archetypes. So it's like, it can be so silly, but also just like the most mature, like gut-wrenching, you're crying kind of show ever. It's awesome.
Oh, fantastic. Now, no spoilers because Michael is currently watching it and we're about halfway through the run, halfway through season 2.
Yep.
So,
I hope that wasn't spoilers.
No.
You
didn't tell me anything I didn't know.
Yeah, he hasn't seen the play episode yet, but that's fine. That's not really a spoiler.
They've just left Ba Sing Se, but so a couple of episodes ago, I was like, oh my god, this is North Korea. Like,
yeah, exactly. So are you enjoying it then, I guess?
Very much so. It's so incredibly well written and rich and satisfying. Like, it's great.
Oh, Sarah, I love your mug. That has nothing to do with your pick. I'm pretty sure that everyone had that on the list. It was on my list.
Awesome.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh wow!
Oh,
Treat yourself.
But
They
I
just
haven't
put it
gotten
on
around to it.
Netflix.
Oh, it's
I was
on
gonna
Netflix
say,
now?
like,
Yeah, they just put it up. So treat yourself.
oh, did they just put it up because it was up for a while, then they took it down, and I guess it's back up now. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I would recommend watching the stuff that came after it too. Like, I love Legend of Korra. It's not as well received, but I love it. And even Voltron's fun in its own way.
Is that to set in the Avatar universe now?
No, but it's from the same creators.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I was super confused for a second there. Like, you love
Did she
Avatar.
just
You
snipe some
love Big
picks?
Bad Beetleborgs.
Honestly, it's true.
Well, yes. Anybody can now pick Voltron or Legend of Korra. They're both still on the table.
Or
Yes.
Big Bad
Okay.
Beetleborgs.
Sean, if you want to grab one of those, go for it. And also, if you're watching and you want to comment on any of the shows that people are talking about, please throw a comment into the YouTube or Facebook comment box, and we might be able to make it big and everybody can appreciate your insight.
Come on the screen.
Sean, let's hear it. What have you got?
Okay. Boy. Trying to figure out which one is most likely to be sniped. And knowing Adam, I'm going to pick Eek the Cat.
Damn it!
This is by Savage Steve Holland, who might be known to some viewers by his movie work, like Better Off Dead and other things with John Cusack before Cusack hated him. And Eek the Cat is a charming little show about a cat that loves to help and is perpetually endangered by his girlfriend's guard dog, Sharky, the shark dog, who has a little tiny dog with a big fin. And it's charming. It's never it never sinks into the bleakness of his repetitive injuries. Instead, he's just constantly upbeat and, by gosh, gonna pull through. So yeah, eat the cat.
Yay.
I've never actually watched that one.
Oh, it's a delightful show. I was obsessed with it as a kid because it felt tailor-made for me, especially after there was a hole in my heart when Ren Stimpy got canceled. And it was a show that was just fueled by cinema references. And as a kid, I was so happy. It was like, oh my God, I get this. And it was a show that would be so specific that there were Penelope Spheris jokes, and I got them.
Excellent. Eek the cat. All right.
It never hurts to help.
I think we're ready to move on to Michael's choice.
Sure.
What have you got for us?
Well, when I learned that I was going to be going last, I kind of assumed that this would be sniped. And maybe I'm going to take it from you, Chris. I have its cheap knockoff version, Stefan Galaxy, as an alternate. But I would like Steven Universe, please.
Surprise, surprise.
Yep. This show literally just finished. And so it's not something I watched as a child. It's something that I came to as an adult. I have so much envy for a smart, sensitive 10 or 11-year-old who is having this show right now to inform their childhood. The world building is so rich. I've never really known a show that is so deft in how it handles really complex topics like consent and relationships and sexuality and things like that. And it's a kid's show. And they do all of this addressing of topics which would not be okay for a children's show to take on board through really clever use of metaphor and allegory, which is entirely legible and satisfying at the same time. The art design is gorgeous. The character design is gorgeous. It has... when I finish Avatar, maybe it'll have there'll be a challenger to this title, but it currently has the best villain to good guy redemption arc that I know. So, but yeah, it's just satisfying. It makes me laugh, it makes me cry, and it's just a very rich experience. It's also the gayest show I've ever seen, way gayer than First Book. So.
Sounds awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's such a good show.
And the songs.
Yeah.
And
I just watched the first season a couple months ago, and it's good stuff.
Oh,
it only gets better.
Yeah, that's the first season ending with Jailbreak, right? The
yeah.
You have such riches ahead of you.
If I have one complaint, it's that there's not enough Mayor Dewey.
Yes,
it's true. Bill Hodgson. So.
Yeah. Perfectly cast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a fantastic show. It is one of the smartest shows about sex and relationships I've ever seen on TV, and it's a kids show, and they get away with it by figuring out some interesting metaphors and being honest in an interesting way.
Yeah.
So I actually have not seen an episode of this show, and I know how popular it is. But is this it's all metaphorical, or is there actual relationships? Is there kissing and... Just out of curiosity, because I'm serious.
Well, no, it's a fair question. So yeah, most of the characters are beings made out of hard light, and so they have this thing called fusion, where two of them can trust each other with their light and form one being. And
it's Milton's. It's like Milton's Angels.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Ooh.
And so fusion can be something that is very trusting and loving, and it can be an expression of love between two people, but it can also be coercive and violent. And fusion is just a cheap ploy by weak gems to be stronger. It can be sort of seen as a war tactic.
Wow.
So it's great.
That's very blatant. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are also human relationships as well that go into detail, and more traditionally emotional relationships, but yeah, absolutely.
Parent-child stuff as well is huge.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, just because like I had just talked about Avatar and like the second half of it, Korra, it's like one of the characters ends up being LGBT, but they went through loopholes and ended up getting like kicked off the network and everything just because they wanted to show a kiss scene. So yeah, that's why I was curious about.
Yeah, the way they get around this is these characters are sort of on paper genderless, but like they don't have biological gender because they're space rocks, but like they all present as female and they all use she her pronouns, and like, you know, there's a great variety. Like some of them are really femme, some of them are a bit more butch, but they're all presenting female. So like that's how they're not gay, they don't have a gender, but they totally do. Like,
right, of course. Yeah.
In at least one country there's a couple of these light space rocks, and there is a wedding scene. I'm going to be a little vague to avoid spoilers, but one of them in some countries had been voiced by a male and the other by a female to make this relationship more acceptable, and so when it came time to animate the wedding sequence, they put the one that was more masculine and voiced by a male actor in some languages in the wedding dress, and had the other one in the tux, because you're going to get there. Like, no,
exactly.
There's a real battle for how queer this is going to be, and Rebecca Sugar was going to push that as far as possible.
Awesome.
Nice.
Excellent. Steven Universe, fantastic show. And obviously, yes, that was one of my picks. We've had a few. That's my turn to choose something. And we've had a few shows so far that have done a thing that I really appreciate in television shows, which is that they end, and that they, through their arc, they sort of know that they're going to come to a beginning and an end. Avatar is incredibly structured over the course of the 3 seasons. Steven Universe knew early on exactly where it was going, and there are some beats that it took years to pay off, but they were entirely planned, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate it when it happens on a small scale as well. So my choice is a very little show called Over the Garden Wall.
Oh, so good.
It's a small 10-episode animated show from 2014, 10 11-minute episodes. It tells the story of 2 half-brothers, Wirt and Greg, who are lost in the woods. And Wirt is a sort of teenager who worries a lot about everything. He's a worrywart. And Greg is sort of young and innocent and friendly and has tons of rock facts to tell you about. And he becomes friend to a frog, which he has real difficulties naming. And it's just very sweet, but also very thoughtful about the relationship between these 2 characters. And it seems like it's just going to be a bunch of little set piece adventures, often with really fun music in the middle of them. But over the course of the 10 episodes, especially in the last few, an entire setup and rationale for what's going on gets revealed. I mean, that's a slight spoiler, I guess, but it is going somewhere. It comes from a place, and that last minute reveal that there has been more to this story all along opens the show up magnificently. It's also just gorgeous. Like, the style is very late 19th century Americana. It's just a sweet little show. And if you haven't seen it, you should treat yourself. I mean, it's 10 episodes of 11 minutes each. It's basically a movie. It's a way to think of it, but somehow I like it more as a series of 10 discrete episodes. So that's Over the Garden Wall. Michael, I know you've seen it. Has anyone else watched it?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I've watched it. It's great.
Oh, it's so heartwarming and beautiful. And as you say, like it's really like sort of late 19th, early 20th century in a stylistic way. That's just gorgeous.
Yes, and it's got a great performance from Peter Jackson alum Melanie Linsky as the bird.
Oh, my favorite character.
Me too. Oh, Linsky's the best.
Yeah.
She's so good in this. Elijah Wood also does the voice of Wirt, and he's fine. I mean, I have strong feelings about Elijah Wood. He does a good job here.
Yeah. Well, the 2 brothers are wearing very strange costumes. The character design is beautiful, and it makes sense eventually. Like, we find out what's going on, but like again, as Chris said, only towards the very end. It's like, it's so gorgeous.
Oh, it's so cute.
Yeah, it's got a great Kate Beaton vibe to its design.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally recommend that. All right. Well, it's time for round 2. So we're going to go back to the top of that pile. And Adam, you get to pick.
It's hard to pick just one, but I'll go with it. Now, we all know that anybody can be a Ghostbuster. You could be a man and be a Ghostbuster. You could be a lady and be a Ghostbuster. And if you go back further enough in time, you can be an ape and be a Ghostbuster.
Damn it!
But there's only 4 real Ghostbusters, as seen on the hit series, The Real Ghostbusters. Whenever I think of Ghostbusters and why I like it, I never think of the movies, though I have a real soft spot for the first one. It's always the show. It's always the syndicated first 97 odd episodes of the show. You've got an amazing cast. You've got Maurice LaMarche, perhaps best known as Brain, or the greatest Orson Welles impression ever heard, as Egon. You've got Frank Welker. Fred from Scooby-Doo was his first role. He's like an icon in the industry. He's playing both Ray, the Dan Aykroyd role, and Slimer, the Green Ghost. You have Arsenio Hall as Winston. And unlike the movies, Winston totally has a personality and stuff and things to say. So that's great. And best of all, better than even his movie counterpart, you have Lorenzo Music, Carlton your doorman, or Garfield, depending on how old you are, as Peter Venkman. And Music's delivery of lines, he can get laughs out of like lines that aren't even jokes. Like there's an episode where he says, "No, if you'll excuse me, I'm going out for a burger," and it's funny for no reason. And the stories were really incredible because the syndicated episodes were script edited by J. Michael Straczynski, who created Babylon 5 and did a ton of stuff. He worked on Murder, She Wrote, Jake and the Fat Man. He's done a ton of things. And those were my 2 examples of a ton of things. And under his watch, the Ghostbusters came up under some really cool storylines, and they frequently broke the rules of 80s TV. So the ghosts were actually dead people a lot of the time. Sometimes they're interdimensional beings. He got cool sci-fi writers to write for the show, like David Gerrold, a Star Trek writer who created the Tribbles, wrote for the show under his watch. And God damn it, the Ghostbusters fought Cthulhu in an episode and won.
All right. So the Real Ghostbusters is not the one with the ape.
No,
that's the original Ghostbusters.
Right.
It's a real Coke 2, Coke Classic thing.
Excellent.
Also, the theme song is better than the version from the movie, so check out the Real Ghostbusters intro. It's way better.
I remember watching this as a child, but I had not seen the films. So
When I saw Ghostbusters in the theater, I was so pissed off because I was a fan of the Larry Storch show. And I was like, "Where's the ape?"
Well,
see,
someday.
I
Someday
remember,
that movie will be made.
I remember just being so disappointed because in the cartoon, Egon is clearly the leader, and Egon is a supporting character in the movies. And it's like, that's not how it goes.
Excellent. All right. So that's the Real Ghostbusters. Suzanne, it is your turn to pick.
I have a real dilemma here because of a few possible really good choices, and I'm really wavering between 2. But I have to go with, again, a very, very classic.
yay!
A show that can be enjoyed by adults and children alike, which I can testify to because I remember when I was a little kid, my dad watching it, and I watched it obsessively as a child. And then when my first daughter was born in 1989, they were airing it on WPIX in New York. So I used to tape it on VHS cassettes, if you remember what those were, because she loved it from the time she was about 2 years old. And her first word was not mama or dada, but rather Batman. So Batman has been very important in our household all along. And for children, the show is like its vividness and its, slightly askew camera angles, especially in the fight scenes, and the almost comic book like layout of the visual sort of culture of the TV show. That's the stuff that appeals. And especially the villains, which are iconic, right? There's the standard ones like the Riddler or Joker or Catwoman or, Mr. Freeze or whatever, but also odd and interesting and obscure ones like the Black Widow, who was played by Tallulah Bankhead, King Tut, played by Victor Bono, Bookworm, played by Roddy McDowall. Like they were like, it was almost like a catalog. You could kind of collect all of these villains and be happy when they would come back again for another episode. But as an adult, you could really enjoy the hidden jokes, the deeper jokes, right? So the show was always happening on at least 2 levels. And so I'm sure I don't have to sell this on you, but it's a truly amazing show. And I never got my driver's license, but if I did, I would get a reproduction of the Batmobile so that I could drive it around town. And that was my fondest wish. If I had a bucket list, it would be to have a Batmobile.
Yes, understandably so.
Such a great
Excellent
show.
choice.
Thank you.
Adam, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Oh, too many, too many. I grew up watching the show on YTV because it was paired with a show that's on my list, and I was riveted. But like every few years, I would come back. Like I would watch crappy old bootlegs before the Blu-rays came out just to revisit this. I watched the movie so many times because it was the only one that was commercially available for a long time.
Sometimes you just can't get rid of a bomb.
And of course, the sacrifice of a porpoise. There's so much to love about it, but I don't know if there's a more endearing performance in the world than Adam West as what he described himself as, the White Knight as Batman. Or the Bright Knight, I should say.
I had the lovely opportunity to watch a few episodes of the original Batman over at Suzanne's house a few years ago. We watched some of the Catwoman episodes. I think we watched some of various Catwomen over the course of it, and then not too long ago, Adam and I talked about a terrible movie that was on MST3K called The Wild World of Batwomen or Batwoman, and because it was such a terrible movie, we treated ourselves by watching a bit, or I treated myself by watching a bit of Batman. And just like even in the first episode, I was really struck by how they nailed it out the gate. Like they knew what they were doing. They had a really striking point of view and perspective. All the character relationships are already there. All the jokes are set up. It was fantastic. We've got our first comment here that we can throw up. It's related to the previous conversation, but Jared is watching, and Megaphonic FM, where's the
Thank you, Jared.
That's no way to talk about Janine Melnitz's secretary.
All right, let's see. Sarah, it's your turn to go next. What have you got for us?
Well, everyone, this is a true story, and it happened to a friend of mine.
Yes.
And being the host of Megaphonic's Scare-itage, I think it's only right that I pick a Canadian horror cartoon called Freaky Stories. From this one was 1997. I was just the perfect age for it when it came out, and it was an animated show about urban legends. It taught me all of the urban legends. At that age, all of them were an amazing, juicy surprise. And the animation style between each episode, because it was an anthology show too, I think over the course of 3 seasons, they had like over 140 short stories told, which is just incredible. And the animation style, as well as like the score and everything, would change constantly between the skits. And outside of those little skits, there was like the connecting pieces of the well-known maggot Maurice and the cockroach. What was his name? Larry D. Bug, I believe.
Larry D. Bug.
And it was like animatronic puppets in this amazing real set of like a gross, disgusting diner after dark, and it grossed me out so much as a kid, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. They were just my mascots growing up. And there were so many iconic stories that they talked about. Like I learned about the spider in the lady's hair urban legend. Like there were funny ones, there were actually really creepy ones, there were super disgusting ones. So this show is like a definite.
That's fantastic. I've never heard of this show.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it came down to the States.
Oh,
It was a staple on YTV.
It was.
Have you like at least seen the little characters or anything like that?
I've just looked them up. They look wild. They look very
Yeah.
90s.
Very
Yeah.
90s.
I had such a fraught relationship with that show because it was so gross.
Oh, I know. There was one episode that traumatized me. I still tell people this story to this day, like 20 plus years later. And it's one where like this, sorry for any Freaky Stories spoilers, but it's one where this this teenager goes to his neighbor's house and starts helping her with some chores around the house, hoping to make a few bucks. And he sees that she just hoards all this stuff. She has all this food in her cabinets and everything. And he finds like jars of like mixed nuts, and he's like, oh, this is the great stuff, like walnuts and Brazil nuts and all this and everything. So he starts eating them, and every time he goes, he's eating more and more. And then at the end, he finds out, because he catches her, she's just sucking the chocolate off of all of the nuts and keeping them in a jar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's so gross, and it traumatized me, and now I love it. It's such a good urban legend.
That picture is a testimony to the enduring influence of Ren and Stimpy right there.
That screenshot just was like a Madeline. Like the memories flood back.
Oh, I don't know if I want to dig that one out. That's an excellent choice.
HRDers Sesame Street.
Oh, wow. All right. Who is next? Sean, you're up. What is your pick?
I'm just reflecting that Sarah really had no choice but to go down the rabbit hole of Canadian horror after that. That's true. I'm going to go, and I will defend this as being a kid's show, despite its family intent. I'm going to go with Irwin Allen's Lost in Space.
Oh, yeah, that.
Yeah.
Mid-60s. It's actually based on a comic book, which was completely the wrong way around for how that comic company worked. These were the people who did a lot of comic adaptations of popular TV shows and movies. They also had like a lock on the Disney franchise. They're the ones who hired the people that made up Duckburg and the Beagle Boys and all of that. So it's a big publisher, big on licensed product. They decided to branch out on their own stuff one day and came up with Space Family Robinson. And after like 18 issues, 20 issues, Irwin Allen was like, so can I make a show out of this? And after that, he changed the name, more peppy, Lost in Space. Space Family Robinson started putting Lost in Space in smaller font under the title. And it's wildly inventive. It's harmless. It's non-thought provoking. And it utterly destroyed Star Trek in the ratings. And looking back, I could see why. Like, I love the original Star Trek, but like occasionally they try to make you think in really obvious ways, and there is no thought happening in Lost in Space. It's all very silly and superficial, and it's how is Dr. Smith gonna lead Will wrong this time?
Well, this is what I was just going to say. That's a very strange relationship, Dr. Smith and Will Robinson. What do you think? Like, that was weird, that whole scene.
Well, and I think it was intentionally weird. Like, that was still a time when, your villainous characters would be coded queer.
Mm.
So, there's Zachary Harris camping, there's Jonathan Harris camping it up as Dr. Smith, and it's creating this weird dynamic of him leading the boy astray.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when I was watching it as a kid, I didn't get that. I was just like, Dr. Smith is so cool.
He's why I watched.
Oh, man.
Well, I just posted in the Slack a bunch of pictures from my favorite episode, The Great Vegetable Rebellion.
I was just looking at that, like, what the heck?
Third season episode, yep.
Dr. Smith makes friends with a sentient carrot.
Yes.
God.
Literally happens.
It's still like one of the episodes on this show still haunts me because it's the creepy kid who lives on the other side of all mirrors.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the rare penny plots. And it's before they gave up on having any of the rest of the family do anything and focused extremely on Will. So this creepy kid comes from out of the mirrors to seduce, the carrot, to seduce Penny away. And from then on, I've had this weird relationship with mirrors where I think this ugly kid is on the other side.
See, an interesting adding to your great point about like the what you and Suzanne were talking about in regards to the relationship between Will and Dr. Smith. I think one of the reasons why that's there is the way that censors thought about these things back then is that, oh, well, we can't have him leading a girl astray. That will imply hanky-panky. Yet, if it's just a boy and an older man, nothing bad will possibly happen in Hollywood.
Yes. And it's such a foundational relationship in my mind that I based a comic on that later. My Dr. Gravely and Billy stories are all about that sort of juvenile older man who's leading the intelligent kid astray with his kind of whimsical notions, and has to be, the kid has to be the one to go, wait, no, this is wrong.
How is the recent reboot?
I love the reboot. I love what they did with Dr. Smith. Even though it's a completely different Dr. Smith, I think that it's a great show. It's a much more thoughtful show than the original. And being a diehard Irwin Allen fan, it hurts me to the core to say this, but I think it's better.
Oh, wow. My. All right.
The 90s movie featuring Matt LeBlanc.
And the
That
CGI
never
monkey.
happened. That did not happen.
I've forgotten about it. Okay, Lost in Space. Excellent. Mikey, you picked Steven Universe last time. What are we going to add to your collection now?
I'm so glad, Sean, that you just picked Lost in Space, because I have picked what was genuinely my favorite television show when I was 10 years old, and you can buy toys of it. So I'm going to argue it is legit, and that's Star Trek The Next Generation.
Yeah, I knew where you were going with that.
What's off my list?
Oh my god, I lived and breathed this show when I was, let's say, between ages 9 and 13 or so, which coincided with its later seasons, which, excepting the 7th, tend to be the stronger. But, like, I didn't care about that. I just, every night, I would turn on ITV to see the end credits of The Young and the Restless play, and then it was Star Trek. And when Star Trek was over, it was bed. And to me, I think it really informed my sense of how the world ought to be. Like, this is how adults are supposed to be. Everyone gets along with each other. Everyone's part of a team. There's this nice ensemble cast. Everyone has a role that they're comfortable with. The spaceship is well lit. Bad things happen, but there's never any true peril other than the Borg, which were terrifying. And I think it was just an early instance of comfort watching. And I just enjoyed how I was in my preteens and I was quite intelligent. And so it was pitched at the right level to, like, give me thought experiments that I found satisfying, but that weren't all that upsetting. So it's just stayed with me all of my life as this constant. I like other Star Trek series. I often say that Voyager is my favorite, and I don't want to get into that with you people right now. Yes, the Troy cake. Oh my god.
What? Cellular cake.
This is a dream.
Haunting.
This is a dream sequence. It's right out of Margaret Atwood's The Edible Woman. Anyways, I don't have all that much more to say about it, other than it's just very sort of foundational on how I think and feel about the world looking back. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, all right. Star Trek The Next Generation. I'm not going to argue that it wasn't aimed at children.
I'd argue, but honestly, like, I fell in love with the original Star Trek as a kid watching it in syndication. So, yeah. Star Trek's always been for kids.
There's nothing wrong with being for kids.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's exclusively for kids.
I wonder how many adults who are into Star Trek got into it as a child, and I almost kind of wonder, is it possible to get into Star Trek as an adult, or do you need to get into it as a kid?
I think you need to hit them young, because that's how most diehard fans I know of got into it before they turned 12.
Yeah.
Did any of you see the cartoon?
Yes, the Star Trek cartoon.
The Star Trek cartoon? Yeah.
I thought that's what you were talking about at first.
Well, that is as, if not more adult than some of the Star Trek shows. But it does have my favorite character in it, which is, of course, Harry Mudd, who has love crystals. And this is not about TNG, I admit, which inspires a man and a woman to fall in love. But if two men are together, they just become very good friends who touch each other a lot. But I love that he tempts Nurse Chapel to like lure Spock away, because Nurse Chapel's basically an incel, and his pitch, delivered perfectly by Roger C. Carmel, is Mr. Spock will be in love with you.
All right. Well, somebody may still pick Star Trek or the animated Star Treks, or Star Trek original series and the animated Star Trek. But yes, and yes, thank you, Kadao, our good viewer Kadao, for pointing out the mint frosting on Troy's cake.
I think it was mint like polypeptide frosting or something.
Well,
there was a science term.
cake.
Yes, cellular peptide cake. Thank you.
All right. It's my turn again, and I'm going to pick a fairly obscure one. I'm not sure. Definitely there are more well-known ones on my list, but I'm going to pick a show. As you may know, I am and was a bit of a nerd. And I was really into, when I was a kid, I would stay up real late. This is not my pick, but I would watch late night. They would have these animated math lessons on PBS that I think were made in Canada. I think they were a TV Ontario thing, but I don't remember now. And so that was where I first got introduced to ideas like calculus. It was pretty great. I was much too young to really get it, but I was much too old to really be watching Square One television when it was on in the late 80s and early 90s. This was a math show on PBS. I don't know if the rest of you know about it, but it was, the first half of it was set up with little skits and sketches about math with various characters in various scenarios. One of the most famous ones was a thing called Math Man, which was a little animated Pac-Man type thing that would go around. We would have a task, eat only the prime numbers, let's say, and then it would have to go through its maze and avoid the non-prime numbers and eat the prime numbers, and that was how you would learn about that. And it would go math man instead of waka waka waka. And then suddenly the Mr. Glitch, I think, was the baddie's name, this little tornado thing that would come in and defeat it. So that was always fun. And there were a bunch of other things. There was some courtroom dramas and some game shows that were all very mathy and again very much like the sketches on Sesame Street. Second half of the show was devoted to a specific thing called MathNet, which was like Dragnet, but they solved problems using math. It was two cops and the woman, there would change of actor, but they kind of played it the same way halfway through the show's run. But she reminds me, she's doing a what's his toes from Friday from Dragnet impression. Mm-hmm. So she's very serious and very down to earth and has kind of a goofy male partner who's like always getting into trouble. He's not an idiot, but is always doing things that are a little dumb. And when I finally saw Fargo, Arch Gunderson reminded me so much of the MathNet cop that I was like, oh, that's where they got the inspiration for this from. I don't think that would hold up if I rewatched it. I haven't rewatched it. It was a great treat. Square One television, the perfect show for a young nerdy kid like me. And now already has a comment. Yes, MathNet was how I thought the police were supposed to work. I was very disappointed later. Yeah, police work involves a lot less algebra than you'd think. Did anyone else watch Square One?
No, never heard of it.
I vaguely remember MathNet. So
yeah, they spun MathNet out to its own show later on. As a sort of compilation of the bits, because it might syndicate better than. I don't know. It was kind of popular for a bit. Well, check it out if you ever get a chance to.
I think it introduced me to the concept of square roots. Anyways.
That was its job. All right. We have time for, let's do one more go round. And
okay.
Oh, no.
Be good. So back to the front, Adam has picked the Ren and Stimpy Show and the Real Ghostbusters. And what is the third on your team?
Well, I went pretty retro with my first two choices, so I may as well choose one of the newer shows here on this list. It is my favorite cartoon of pretty much the turn of the century. The last 20 years, I'd say this is my favorite that's come out, as a little show called Gravity Falls. A delightful program that has elements of Twin Peaks, The X-Files, creepypastas, horror movies. There is a reference to Freddy Krueger, who I think shows up in kind of a Tobin Spirit Guide type book. That's the books that are littered throughout the series as just like spooky dream hipster. Even though it's about primarily two children, twin siblings, who refreshingly have a really positive and supporting relationship and are basically each other's biggest fans. I've never related harder to a TV character than I do to the kid's great uncle, Grunkle Stan, who is largely watching TV, conning people out of money, and just kind of like getting by the seat of his pants and charisma. I love Grunkle Stan. He's almost every line is an MVP line for me. My favorite is one that has been immortalized in GIF form, where he realizes that the reflection of his watch in the sun on a hot summer day is blinding a child, and he goes, "Yes, yes, burn the child." A delightful program, recommended for the young and the young at heart.
Excellent. I have not actually seen it.
Jared agrees.
Yes. Oh, fantastic show.
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch it, but I just haven't gotten around to it.
Basically, alum from every cartoon you like, such as Adventure Time and Rick and Morty, and I think there's even been some Steven Universe crossover there too, but I could be wrong on that one. But yeah, just about everyone who's like working in cartoons who's cool now has worked on Gravity Falls. There's even a very, very slight Rick and Morty crossover where a portal in the show opens and a cup of coffee flies out, and then later in Rick and Morty, you see that cup of coffee like land in Rick's garage.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Gravity Falls. All right. Suzanne, you had Sesame Street and the original Batman. And what is going to be the third Desert Island Kids show that you get?
Again, it's very hard to choose because I have a couple of options, but I feel like one that is really worth choosing is something that's almost perennial. Its earliest form was really fabulous, but it's had an ongoing life in a number of different media. It's Gotta Catch Them All.
Yeah.
Gotta Catch Them All. Pokemon. And one of the things that struck me so much about Pokemon, which I was too old, I didn't see it as a child, but I watched it with my children, and children of different ages. So my oldest daughter was born in '89, and my fourth child was born in 2003. So I kind of watched Pokemon through the eyes of all these different kids, witnessing such things as the collecting of Pokemon cards, and of course, more recently, Pokemon games and so on, and the whole Pokemon Go phenomenon and so on. And one of the things that I found endlessly fascinating about Pokemon, many things, but one of them is just this whole idea of a Pokemon world, that there was this taxonomy, this very elaborate taxonomy of Pokemon, so that they had, each one would have its different evolved forms. There were, water Pokemon, fire Pokemon, air Pokemon, and so on, right? But then also there were these kind of add-ons like rock Pokemon and, what was it? Not Mystic, Ghost Pokemon, and so on, right? So this whole idea of like a universe that you could taxonomize, I found absolutely fascinating. And children love that. Children love taxonomizing things. And I found that raising kids to be a really interesting point of contact. And then, of course, the other thing that's absolutely fascinating about it is the vicarious battles that you have this kind of Bildungsroman, of Ash as he moves through the world, as Ash Ketchum moves from gym to gym, becoming, a Pokemon master, which is his destiny, right? And you have to it's this weird vicarious battles. Instead of physical battles that you yourself participate in, you deploy your Pokemon. And so it was just like such a robust kind of universe. I thought it was incredibly fascinating. And watching each child in turn enter into it was really neat. So I would say Pokemon.
Meow forever.
Oh yeah, a classic.
Yeah, you could do a whole episode on favorite Pokemon, right?
If that happens, that would be my birthday.
I think you're totally right about children loving taxonomy. Like,
Yeah.
here's a big system with lots of rules to learn that explains everything. Yeah.
Like, I'm super into it. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
And Detective Pikachu may be Ryan Reynolds' finest performance.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, and it's great. Like, it's not just like, interesting how different age groups get into it. It's amazing how, I mean, I've been into it since I was about 10, and 20 plus years later, I'm still completely dedicated. I just bought the most recent game, It's pretty much an endless fandom.
If we do that Pokemon episode, of course, I'm going to have to pick my favorite Pokemon, Sfeel.
I don't know how many people get it.
Chris, why do you have a picture of Matt Frewer as a cartoon?
That is, of course, Sfeel as drawn by Julia Lepetit of Drawfee for their breakout hit, drawing Pokemon from memory. Julia, of course, had no idea what Pokemon were like. Never watched the show and just went crazy. And
well, with the Pokemon they come out with now, it's close.
Exactly. All right. Well, Pokemon, excellent. Let's see, Sarah, you had picked Avatar and Freaky Stories. So what have you got for us third?
I'm gonna go Canadian again because I clearly didn't grow up glued to YTV. And go with Reboot.
Yeah!
Oh, you sniped someone.
Oh, you
Chris,
sniped me.
Oh, you know what? This was hard. I thought we'd do more than 3, so I had to boost Reboot up a little bit.
Just in case anybody doesn't know what Reboot looks like.
Oh, that's so good. What
Chris, I'm hoping you at least know this Canadian show.
only now, only because of Michael and podcasting with Canadians have I heard of it. I did not grow up with it.
Reboot is a perfect show. And I think it was like 94, 95. It was at the perfect time when nobody understood computers. So the idea of this giant like society living within one was perfectly reasonable to me as a child. It had amazing, iconic characters. It referenced pop culture so often that it was just like, even at a young age, I adored that so much. They have an entire episode mimicking Evil Dead with Ash in it. It's just, it's fantastic. And there's like such iconic villains like Hexadecimal,
Yes.
who you still see, all the time, people cosplaying at conventions and stuff. It's just a wonderful show. It's got great humor. It's got super serious, like, drama plot points, and the effects were amazing when it came out. It was super impressive.
If you say so. I didn't get the chance to see it when it came out. To my mind, looking at it now, it looks like when video games did the terrible thing and went 3D with your Super Mario World and all that, and just looked
Final
hideous.
Fantasy and stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's its whole claim to fame. It was the first CGI show, right?
Yeah.
Like, but like Sarah, I'm so enjoy the pick because
I'm enjoying it.
I had the opening monologue open in another window. No. You got it fair and square, and
to mend
I'm
and
so
defend.
Glad. Yes.
I
come
just
from the net.
I got rid of Sailor Moon to do Reboot.
But you're so right, because like it had continuity. It had like season-long arcs.
Yeah.
Which is like unusual for any show.
It was like watching a soap opera. Yeah.
Were there ever sexier cartoon characters than Hexadecimal, Megabyte, and Mike the TV? I ask you.
I don't think so.
Also grown up Enzo.
Oh my gosh! Don't even get me started.
Is Mike the TV a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory reference?
Yes.
Yeah, probably. They have an entire Dungeons and Dragons episode, Chris, which you'd have a lot of fun with.
Okay, well, maybe I'll give it a try someday. Sean, you went with Eek the Cat and Lost in Space. What will balance that diet?
Just gotta plug in.
It's a tough call. Gotta call a bunch of them. But I think I'm going to go with Star Blazers, otherwise known as Space Battleship Yamato. This was a Japanese show that came over in the 70s, and it was it's not the greatest show in all honesty, but it was my first exposure to a lot of things. It was the first time I'd ever seen a show that knew that it was going to end. Like, it had a plot arc over the length of it. You know, they had to get to a planet, and the whole show, like every episode, they'd be like, you know, day 152. You know, so you mark the advancement as they were heading towards the inevitable goal, which just blew my mind. I was very young. It also had some of the most, it had atrocious 70s dubbing, which gave such great memorable line deliveries as missiles approaching, things like that. But like, it was also one of my first encounters with a more genderqueer kind of perspective. Of course, it was the villain, because that's how you start. But you know, the fact that you'd see the villain, and you know, you're a kid, taxonomy is important, and I'm watching this villain, and I'm like, it's a man with lipstick, I think. Or is it a butch woman? It was really confusing and baffling to young Sean, and set me on a road of discovery that I'm still wandering.
Cool.
That's fantastic. This is another one that I don't really know.
No, me neither.
Yeah, there's no use seeking it out. It's terrible. I tried watching it recently, and it's just god awful. But it's no Gatchaman Battle of the Planets.
All right. Excellent. Let's see. I guess we're almost out of our picks. This is, I think, our last round. So there's a few biggies still on the table, and I don't want to have to pick them. So Mikey, it's up to you. Well, I mean, you get to pick whatever you want to take with you, along with Steven Universe and Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yes.
Very much the same show. What else are you going to be
Well, I think I have two on my big list. There are two that have big stars next to them that I've written in all caps, so I need to pick one. And I'm going to pick the one that I think complements these other two best. And that is early 90s diversity propaganda, Ghostwriter. Hey! I loved this show so much. Awesome. It was set in New York City, and I grew up in rural Newfoundland, so like it was already exotic and exciting to me. And like it featured like these various kids who like made friends with a ghost who you could communicate to the ghost by writing, and the ghost could communicate back by taking letters from the environment and spelling things in the air that only these chosen children could see. And like, if they was like, they would solve mysteries, and you know, if they needed to have a meeting, you would write down Rally M would meet at Michael's house, and it would go to the other kids. The ghost would send that message. It was like texting before there was texting, basically. And as someone who communicates solely by text, I really was into it. But yeah, like it was just it struck me because I was such a dork as so cool. All these kids were so cool to me. They did such cool things, and I wish Ghostwriter would be my friend so that I could be part of their gang. Thanks, PBS.
Great show.
What kind of what was the plot? Like,
you never saw Ghostwriter?
No, I don't even know if I've heard of this.
Oh wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to find like a YouTube clip and put it in the Slack.
Please, yeah.
Like, I just remember there are various plots like to do with the kids' lives, like maybe someone is having trouble with their parents, but then there are other things like I don't remember. Does anyone else who saw it? So I guess Adam. Do you remember any of the bigger plots?
I just remember there always being a mystery, and the first season may or may not have had Samuel L. Jackson. I don't know if that's a phantom memory on my part.
I do remember. That is not Ghostwriter. That is Ghostwriter. He is no friend to literacy, Chris.
Close enough.
Not Johnny Blaze.
Ghostwriter was basically a glowing asterisk that like floated around.
So I guess they would just it would help them solve mysteries or like figure out problems and
solve
stuff.
Mysteries, but also their life. Like there were two siblings who like lived at the back of their parents' bodega, and then there was like a girl who was like single parented by her father who was like trying to become a pop star, and like things like that. It was very New York, and it was like they filmed it in New York, so like you got to see various like settings around. I seem to remember plots got real crazy as the series went on. They traveled back in time, like at the end of the second season, about 100 years.
Oh yeah.
Hey, ghosts have powers. Oh god. Anyways, go on.
Did you know there's there have been a few reboots of Ghostwriter, but there's one that's very new. I actually don't know if it's out yet, but it's one of the shows. Yeah, it's out now. It's on Apple TV.
I will give it a chance, but I'm afraid they'll make it too cool. Like it has to be really dorky.
Yeah.
It's got color grading from the imagery.
That's just it. Is that basically episodes of Ghostwriter should look indistinguishable from episodes of the Canadian teen comedy Student Bodies.
Oh man, that was a great show.
Oh my god. Oh, I've just looked at the cast photo. They're so early 90s.
Oh my god, yes.
This was your dream crew back in the day, Mike.
Oh, absolutely.
That's good. That is so. I'm glad that you picked a show where you solved mysteries through writing and literacy
and the occult.
And I picked a show where you solve mysteries through math. That's all right. Well, it's just down to me. I've just got to make one more. There's a lot of big fish still on the table, and I think one of them I'm going to have to pick just because it would be terrible if nobody picked it. It would be just offensive if we got out of this show, this episode of the best kids shows, and nobody picked this. We would never be allowed again to the God damn it! We'd never be allowed again to the land of make believe.
Yeah. I'm happy.
That's not.
How did that happen?
Forced my charisma.
Played by Mike.
So Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. This is not. I assumed that I'd be sniped on this one, and therefore I didn't have much prepared to say about it. But it's just the super nicest show ever. And if I haven't watched the recent documentary about Mr. Rogers, about Fred Rogers, mostly because I don't need to cry. I already accept that he was a sweet person and a terrific show. But this show was on. Certainly, this is a show that I watched during my childhood, as I imagine a lot of us did. Just a sweet, welcoming show that allowed you into some nice man's living room and then into his land of make believe, and was just so calmly paced and chill and accepting and did a few. It's known for doing a few impressive things, including having people showing a greater diversity of people than was often seen on TV at the time, and that's certainly true. But mostly it was just the comfort and the routineness of it. And I remember in particular an episode where I forget whether it was Mr. McFeely or somebody was there, but he was talking with somebody and they were showing off the model of the neighborhood that the camera sort of zoomed in over during the opening credits. You would see this sort of, let's look at the neighborhood, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and then you fly by all these houses and so forth. And they showed off the model. And it was this weird moment of breaking the fourth wall and like showing how the show was made that blew me away as a little kid. Just like the fact that you could even do that. And it showed the level of honesty of process, let's say, that Mr. Rogers took with this show that, suffuses everything he does. But I always found that to be just a particular moment of like, no, we're going to show you exactly how this works. Without breaking the illusion that you're coming over to my house and that it's a comfortable place. Like, we're not going to pan back and show that this is just a set, but we will show you how we made the opening credits because it's interesting and you should know about it. You should know that this is the artifice that goes into making TV shows. So that's a very sort of unsentimental view of Mr. Rogers, I guess. But I'm sure other people have thoughts about him as well.
That show was so committed to showing you like the liminality between worlds as a way of constructing these interior spaces of safety and love. Like, you know, as a child, I was like, just always watch that show. Then you got a little older and you're like, oh, you know, that's a little kid show, but you'd still kind of like on the QT watch it. Yeah. Because it was the fact that you would look right at you and, you know, I like you just the way you are. And it's easy to mock that. But as a child, it's such a great thing to hear. And as you said, that pan in was a really important way of constructing that world, but also entering in, changing the shoes, taking off the jacket and putting on the sweater. It was like it was a threshold, right? I mean, a threshold in more than just a literal sense. And then same thing going into the world of make-believe, right? You'd follow the trolley and then you'd be on the other side, right? And it created these intimate spaces. I love that show.
Yeah, same here.
I have never seen one episode of Mr. Rogers.
Oh my God.
I grew up on the much more Canadian version, which was Mr. Dress Up.
Yeah.
Both of those are on my list.
That was I watched that one. It's the exact same thing. It's that sense of comfort. It's that friendly old man, but it was Canadian one.
Yeah, and you know what? Ernie Coombs and Fred Rogers, they raised me as much as anybody else did on TV.
That's awesome.
Kidal says, along the same lines, watching Reading Rainbow and TNG at the same time was a bit of a trip as a kid in general. But then when Reading Rainbow went over to the TNG set to talk about TV production, brains blurred.
I remember learning how they did the transporter effects on that episode of Reading Rainbow.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I remember because I grew up in New York, so one of my friends in 7th grade had been on Reading Rainbow. Now, he'd also been in a Broadway play, but Reading Rainbow was far more impressive, and also you sometimes catch it on reruns. I've never heard of a Raisin in the Sun? I'd never heard of that. I definitely had heard of Reading Rainbow.
Whatever. Amazing.
All right. Well, we have passed the hour mark. Everybody has had a chance to choose 3 TV shows to take with them and watch until the end of time. We're going to do the little bit of house cleaning here because I'm sure everybody had a bunch more shows on their list. So we'll do the Bring Out Your Dead round where you get to talk about things that didn't quite make your top 3. And we're going to review the choices that you did make with yourself. So we'll start again with Adam. Adam, you will be walking away to watch for the rest of your childhood the Ren and Stimpy Show, the Real Ghostbusters, and Gravity Falls. But what don't you get to watch?
Well, I had Star Trek The Next Generation, Avatar, and Eek the Cat sniped from me. Also on the list, the original Star Trek, the original Twilight Zone, the original Doctor Who, the 1990s cartoon version of The Tick.
Yes.
I also had sniped from me the 60s Batman, but alongside it, I had Batman the Animated Series from the 1990s, which is just phenomenally written and animated.
All excellent choices.
And, lastly,
go ahead.
CBC's The Odyssey.
Yes, I knew you would bring that up. Talk about liminality between worlds.
Yes, I learned much.
So I didn't watch that show. Is that based on the
No.
Homer film?
No, it is not.
I think we actually did mention that in the podcast at some point, but who can remember what you say in a podcast? All right. Suzanne, you are going to get to watch for the rest of your childhood and your children's childhood and perhaps someday their children's childhood, Sesame Street, the original Batman, and a phenomenally long run of Pokemon.
I'd be happy just to watch those shows forever. I had a couple things sniped, Ren and Stimpy and Mr. Rogers, but some of the other shows that I would have had were Teletubbies. Incredibly fascinating. You could put a 6-month-old in front of that show and they'd be transfixed, and that is fascinating to do with them. The Wiggles. Anybody have feelings about the Wiggles?
No, sorry.
Wiggles neutral.
You're missing out.
That's
You're
something
missing
that your
out.
kids watched, right? Like that's from
Yeah.
then,
Well,
right?
it's the co-watching, right? Co-watching with little kids is the trippiest thing ever. You've not lived till you've gone to a Wiggles concert, believe me.
The mosh pit is wild.
Oh my God, it's amazing. Blue's Clues.
Yes.
Oh, yep. Mostly
Another-
because Steve was very attractive.
Steve was okay.
That was definitely like an older show for me. Like I watched it with my nephew and it was great.
Yeah, early years especially. And Pinky and the Brain.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
You know, again, the repetition, you always knew exactly where you were going to be, what you were going to be doing every night. And, that sense of an ordered universe, I think, was really meaningful. And Power Rangers, early years of Power Rangers.
Mhm.
My children used to call me Rita Repulsa as a
I mean, best character.
Yeah.
undoubtedly.
Although Bulk and Skull, great characters.
Fantastic. Well, excellent list. Sarah, what? Let's see. You've got Avatar: The Last Airbender, Freaky Stories, and Reboot. Kind of an eclectic choice, I suppose, but very Canadian. What else didn't you get a chance to take with you?
Well, two of my favorite anime shows, westernized anime shows, Sailor Moon and Digimon. Then there was Wishbone, if anyone knows that show.
Yes, of course, Wishbone. I was hoping somebody would say Wishbone.
Yeah, that was definitely high up there, but you told me to pick 10, and I thought we'd go through all of them. Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark, of course.
Oh, yes.
A show that most people don't remember called Angela Anaconda.
Oh yeah,
I remember that. What a good animation style.
Amazing animation style, late night show that was just so weird and wacky. It was incredible. Animaniacs for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And a very recent one that just ended this year called Rapunzel's Tangled Adventure. And it's a show based off of Tangled, like the Disney movie Tangled. Incredible show. It's so witty. It's one of the funniest shows I've ever seen. Me and my adult friends watched it over the last couple of years as it was airing, and it was like rolling around laughing funny.
Nice.
Fantastic.
And the art's phenomenal too, yeah.
Oh, excellent.
I'm so glad you mentioned Sailor Moon. That's another great one.
Oh yeah.
Sailor Moon I only know from dating gay men in
to break that stereotype, I adored and still adore Sailor Moon because there's something about a girl fighting crime with the help of a talking cat that is irresistible to me.
It is irresistible. It was definitely a defining show for a lot of young people, and yeah, I mean, like
there we go.
I still cosplay Sailor Moon.
Excellent. Sean, you get to watch for the rest of your childish life Eek the Cat, the original Lost in Space, and Star Blazers. What else would you have chosen?
Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. I also had Sailor Moon on there. It was great to see not just a spread of, usually girl characters are like, and then there's the girl who's the girl. And here you had a spread of characters who were all allowed to be flawed in their own ways. And that the main character was like the good heart, but completely fails at almost everything is amazing.
Yeah.
Love Sailor Moon. I also had the Tick animated. I was a big fan of the 13 comics that Ben Edlund managed to eke out, and then was thrilled when it got to TV. I also, because the comics route, put down The Adventures of Sam and Max, Freelance Police. One of the filthiest comics to ever be turned into a kid's show. It's amazing that they managed to be as true to the comic as they did, even cutting like 60% of it out.
I know that from video games.
There were a lot of Sam and Max video games, yeah. Much better environment for it. There was one when I was a kid that I watched. I think it was part of the Croft Super Show called ISIS.
Okay. Yeah. Didn't expect anyone to pimp for ISIS today.
Not today, no. But at the time, it was, she would draw on the power of the goddess Isis and fight criminals, which was pretty awesome. Land of the Lost, Speed Racer, the Larry Storch Forrest Tucker Ghostbusters, all 15 episodes. Fraggle Rock,
Yes.
DuckTales, Tailspin, Rescue Rangers, Darkwing Duck.
Yeah.
So many, so much good.
So
quality
many
television.
choices.
See, it's
All
interesting.
of
You
them
have
better than Star Blazers.
you have the entire Disney afternoon save for Bonkers, which is very telling.
Mikey, you will get to watch the best show ever made, Steven Universe, as well as Star Trek The Next Generation and Ghostwriter, not Ghostwriter. What else might you have wanted to watch?
Well, the only other show that I had that was in all caps with stars next to it was Thunderbirds.
Hey.
I could talk about for quite some time, but I won't. But I just loved that show, those adventure marionettes, those 5 brothers with their amazing machines. Let's see. I had not much sniped from me other than Reboot, but I went to a good home. And Mr. Rogers. I had Rocco's Modern Life.
Oh yeah.
I know has had a recent comeback, which people speak very highly of. Rugrats, which I think was a really great show.
Angelica rules, yes.
Was Rugrats the first show that Mark Mothersbaugh was doing TV work music
No,
for?
that was Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Ah, right.
Yes. I have Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Whatever the actual name of the show was, because I'm
The
also
Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle, I think. But
yes, but I mean all the other cartoons that you would come along, Sherman and the Time Machine and whatnot.
Fractured Fairy Tale.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Aesop and
so
Son.
good.
I mean, Boris and Natasha, I think about all the time. Frankly.
God, yes.
I wish I could speak like Natasha. Anyways, I'm shocked down to the ground that no one has mentioned the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh yeah.
That is a big gap.
I would go to school every morning in grade 1 and grade 2, excited to talk about the last night's episode of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with my friends.
Yeah.
Power Rangers also was on my list. I think this is my first time of having sort of narrative meta awareness when I realized every episode had the exact same plot, and yet I still enjoyed watching it. Captain Planet and the Planeteers, and a very obscure little animated show that was on for about a year or two in the early 90s. I saw on YTV that I was so enthusiastic about that I kind of cringe at my enthusiasm in hindsight, called Botsmaster. I don't expect anyone to remember that.
Nope.
Even I don't know that one.
It
Wow.
was amazing.
I'm not
Nice.
hearing any love for Jason the Wheeled Warriors here.
And what about Supercar, where that teen could turn into a car?
Oh, he lives on in GIF form.
Yes, this was about a 19 or 20-year-old guy who was a genius with robotics, and he made a bunch of cool robots who would fight, and they struggled against the fascist world government. So hey,
Hey.
We could use some of that now.
Yeah.
Quick favorite Rocky and Bullwinkle joke. There's a long-running story arc in which Boris and Natasha are dressed as mice because they are commanding an army of robot mice. And the rule book that all the mice must follow is called Mice Kampf.
Wow. Wow.
Brilliant show.
Oh, wow.
yes,
That's sharp.
indeed.
Listeners and watchers who are watching this in real time, if you have something that we haven't mentioned, mention it in the comments and we'll try to pop it up after I list my extra shows. So I ended up with Over the Garden Wall, Square One Television, and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which is a nice collection, I think. I had shows sniped. I had Steven Universe and Sesame Street mentioned, as well as Avatar. And then I had a few that I wasn't really, that were on my list, but I really, they were sort of things that I didn't have that much to say about, even though they're great, such as Pee-wee's Playhouse, Fraggle Rock, and The Clangers, the British stop-motion show, which is very charming, but which I've only seen a few episodes of, so I really shouldn't speak much of it. Things that I could have spoken a lot more about, The Muppet Show, I had to put down, and I was going to say it instead of Mr. Rogers, or it was what I was expecting to do for my third slot, but a show called Romper Room.
Mhm.
Which
Oh
some
my
of you might be too
God.
young. No, you all know it. Yeah.
Oh,
This is a
yeah.
show that was on from the 50s to the 90s, and it was a really interesting show intended for preschool kids. And I don't remember a lot about it, except that I watched it all the time. And then at the end of it, the host, which originally had been like a kindergarten teacher, but whatever, a nice young woman, would hold up a little mirror that would go invisible and could see through it, and she would say, romper, bumper, stomper, boo, tell me, do magic mirror, tell me today, did all my friends have fun at play? And then she would list the names of some of the potential watchers. You know, I see Sean and Adam and Suzanne and Mikey and Sarah, and I would just watch it hoping for my name to be mentioned. It was also a weird show, and I'm sorry I'm going on about this, but it's also a weird show because it was both a franchise and a national show. So like there was a nationwide broadcast that you could show, but you could also make your own. And I think I grew up when I was very young outside of Philadelphia, and I believe there was a Philadelphia local version. But you know, it was very much in demand to get your kid on that show.
Wow.
The other shows that I had on my list, I mentioned the Muppet Show, I believe. So the one last show that I had on my list, which I guess I'm a little surprised didn't get mentioned, but maybe people haven't heard of it. It's a show called The Simpsons.
I was thinking about this during my
Yeah, me
workout
too.
today, wondering if
Oh,
it was a children's show.
That is a good question. I certainly would allow it.
Yeah, but I mean, now that we've got Star Trek on there and stuff, I was like, oh, I should have said The Simpsons.
Oh, that reminds me of the one show I forgot to mention, Tales from the Crypt. I watched that as a kid.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, I was like, the stuff I watched as a kid does not mean it was a children's show.
Well, exactly. Although I
am
definitely would have
surprised
allowed
that,
Tales from the Crypt.
Oh
Yeah.
man,
I am
yeah.
surprised you didn't have Tales from the Crypt Keeper.
But see,
That's
I
true.
already had the real stuff. Why would I want the diet version?
I watched both, but I definitely was like, this is too PC, and I was like 8 at the time.
We've got some really great
Dumb this
comments
down.
to wrap this out with. Jared says that Fairy Tale Theater belongs on any list of great kids
Oh,
shows.
yeah.
Mm.
I don't know that one.
I've seen a
don't
few episodes of
either.
it. Yeah.
I keep thinking of that as a segment of Rocky and Bullwinkle, but that was something
Yeah.
else. That was Fractured Fairy Tales.
Yeah.
So
Did anyone ever watch
Um,
Art Attack?
Yeah, I remember.
I remember
Yeah.
that.
That was a
Oh.
great show.
the other one, which Cadell lists and which I totally agree with because it's a show I loved as a child, The Price is Right. Good show because it's what you watch when you're sick. It's on at sick
Yeah.
day times. It's excitement, bright colors, loud sounds, basic math.
Yeah.
Coming to understand capitalism as a hype-driven folly. Absolutely, I loved The Price is Right as a kid. I would, be all excited to watch all the great game shows because, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be Guy Smiley when I grew up, and I still find it. So. Here. But yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jared and Cadell, for your suggestions. And thank you to everybody for joining us. So once again, thank you, Adam Clark.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Suzanne Ekbari.
This has been lots of fun. Thank you.
And thank you, Sarah Chamberlain.
Bye.
And thank you, Sean Frost.
It's good to be had.
And thank you, Mikey Collins.
Yay.
And I've been your host, Chris Puma, and we will see you on podcast, or we'll see you next week with another topic where we'll ask our guests to take your pick. Ciao.
Hey.
I need the music.